use.
Oh, okay, do you have space?
There we go.
Okay.
Great.
Welcome to our business meeting of RC3. I'm Terry Clark. As we've said, the business of our community research is community research at RC3, and so we're mainly going to talk about that. We've held elections of officers. The bids have been sent out, and basically we'll have recent results, which Rachel will.
We'll have to announce, but I think you can announce based on that.
You see the main results, which are continuity from the past for the most part. We don't have any budget. The ISA has a little bit of funding which is available for travel, which we participate in, but the normal items which get talked about at business meetings are pretty trivial. We talk about ideas. So ideas and research are what drive us, and in terms of the two main, and what attracted us, I'd say, what made us want to get involved was in a sense an intellectual, historically, the intellectual model of Lipset and Rokon, the Committee on Political Sociology. And we were initially a subgroup under Lipset and Rokon, and what they did, which was so brilliant, which is still today, they produced in their paper by Lipset and Rokon the most coherent analysis of class politics and voting, which still informs today the bulk of that kind of analysis. And they built it growing out of dozens and dozens of small conference meetings like this, and with many participants from different countries. And they talked, and I participated in some of those meetings myself, enough to see it and to say, this is fantastic. We must do this in the urban area, and so we're doing it years later. But the idea is not to just have turnover, but to have a continuous project of research which joins people, and it's exciting because we're working on common themes. We share ideas, we share papers, we know each other, we go back and forth, and then over time we have built up data for the last now 35 or so years. So this was initially the FAUI, the Fiscal Austerity and Urban Innovation Project, and Clemente and I are really the two who worked with the FAUI data. The SCENES project is the last 12 years, and the young people here have never heard of FAUI except in ancient history, so we'll just say 2 or 3 minutes about FAUI, which focuses more on local governments, mayors, city council members, administrators, and it included a wide range of questions which were sent out to these in questionnaires in 35 countries. We have data for over 10,000 cities, and these have been pooled initially by Clemente, internationally for the European countries, and then more recently by James Murdoch, who has been in several of our sessions. When he was engaged, he was in his last week before marriage in his wife-to-be's, his fiancee's village in Vietnam. He sat on the veranda in front of the little village and then sent me every day new progress on pooling the data as he was drinking with his relatives to be and pooled the data for 35 countries, 10,000 cities in a huge file which we now are using. And so you can take from this file data from China, from Spain, from Japan, and you can look at one variable like cafes or left-right voting, and then do an analysis with these data. So there's a SCENES merged file, there's a FAUI merged file, and there's a joint FAUI and SCENES merged file, because there are only about 7 countries for the SCENES project, there are 35 for FAUI, and if you combine the two, you lose cases. But so that was the background. The model, the other I guess the simple point to make was the model of how to work together. We were initially invited to convene a project by the U.S. National Science Foundation. The Sociology and Political Science Director said, we would like to invite you to prepare an urban continuing project on the model of the 4050 Census Project and the National Election Study, which were continuous, decade-long data model collecting organizations which made the data available to everyone. Very large, very expensive, and well funded. So we held a conference, we published a book called Urban Policy Analysis with the papers, proposing the exact data that we would collect, and it was our proposal to the National Science Foundation. We put it in, they said, don't worry about the budget, we'll take care of that. And then there was a political election, as we've had more recently, and the budget of the NSF was cut 40%. So we did not get any money. However, we had built the proposal, we knew we had this coherence of the variables we wanted. So Eleanor Ostrom, who subsequently was the first woman non-economist to win a Nobel Prize in economics, suggested, what if we collected in little bits? So I volunteered, she said, to collect the data for the state of Indiana and to pool it with the others. And so that model we have followed ever since. We break up the big project to smaller pieces. A team which can be one person, a poor assistant professor with no money, no budget, can collect the data in one summer, share it with the others, and then that becomes combined a huge global project with no central funding at all. So we basically have done that. Some teams have gotten lots of money, some have gotten no money, but we share our data, and that sort of that decentralized approach of having strict coherence and consistency on the data, but zero authority on the ideas. That is, leaving people to use their own hypotheses, their own ideology, their own ideas for the data analysis. Sometimes we have the editor of one book or the co-authors of a paper, and they're very tightly integrated. Other times we argue, we disagree. So for instance, this afternoon we had an exchange with Enzo Mingoni, with whom we've been having exchanges over Marxism and transformations away and how capitalism and socialism are varying. Those themes are continuing even this afternoon. Okay, so Clemente, do you want to add anything on FAWI a little bit, and or the new continue, how that has continued for you with SEAMS? We suggested we might have 7 minutes or so of each of the presenters, and then discussion as we continually learn from one another. And others are welcome either to join, to ask questions, to potentially access data, etc. Clemente?
Thank you.
Clemente Navarro from Seville.
From Seville. Universidad Pablo de la Vida, Seville.
Yeah, we have
What can I say about what we say the FAWI in Spanish? FAWI. A long time ago, about the FAWI. Well, when we start to work with the FAWI, we developed mainly two tasks. One of our was more methodological, because this autonomy or decentralization made sometimes difficult to compare data and so on. So the Spanish team did the task to make coherent all the survey that Professor have that time in Chicago. And now we have a file with all the countries, with the item, and we can use without the problem of no coherence in the data. This was the task of the Pablo de la Vida University in the FAWI.
huge task.
Huge. 5-6 person to project funded by the National Research Government. And then the another thing, more theoretical, is that we thought, and we think, that in order to explain different political dynamics or the spread of the new political culture, we have to introduce an institutional explanation. When I start with the FAWI, was in Chicago, I remember my first academic fighting with the Professor Clark in order to introduce a more institutional explanation, because Professor Clark used a more social explanation, a theory more about the modernization, and according to the process of modernization, different society, different mayor develop different kind of political culture. Our issue was that the most important factor was not social development or modernization. The most important factor is the institutional design of local governance. And we developed in the framework of the FAWI idea that is the idea of the local welfare system that nowadays developed by Maria Jesus Rodriguez is over there. And we think that different level, different form or pattern of governance, different political processes, and so on, are explained more by the institutional design of local government than the process of modernization. And this was our first fighting. And now, this is the FAWI, I think more or less is and in the FAWI, I think there are two ways of understand new political, for instance, for us, and we have the analysis that was published in the New Political Culture in the Spanish version. The spread of a new political culture is explained by the electoral system of the mayor, more than the difference in the modernization among societies. And there are the data as published. And now we are starting to fight, academically, because in the Olavide we are trying to introduce this kind of institutional explanation in order to explain things, cultural things in the cities. In the last seminar in Seoul, I introduced a new method and new ideas in order to explain the impact of urban policies in the pattern and change of things. And is the contribution that the Pablo de la Vida will try to do to the project of things. For instance, I spoke sometime with Marta in order to make international comparison with the thing, in order to compare different models of national urban policies. Because I think, I share with Marta, that we could compare the post-communist urban policies with the Mediterranean urban policies, the North European urban policies, and the neoliberal North American urban policies. Sometimes when we analyze things, we see that, for instance, the correlation between socioeconomic status and some kind of thing is very different in Korea than in Spain and the United States. Again, my dear professor Nicole Clark tried to explain this difference according to different process of modernization. And we insist to say that maybe this is explained by the kind of urban policy, because in the North American context, the neoliberal policy make possible a better correlation between income and some kind of thing. In the post-communist urban policy, how to explain? Maybe Marta can explain better than me. It's not possible to try to find correlation, because everything is planned. In Spain, municipalities have no autonomy in order to planning where houses, where cultural amenities and so on have to be put in the city. So it's more difficult to find this kind of correlation between socioeconomic status and some kind of things. So the explanation is more institutional than socioeconomic. And this is the work in the Olavide we are trying to do, fighting academically with in this wonderful academic context. I don't know if it's enough in order to summarize.
But this sort of exchange is exactly what is fruitful, because we share the data and we can say where and why does the strength of the correlation matter. And so in the New Political Culture book, the section which I wrote showed, for instance, how in England, when the new Labour with Tony Blair came to power, that transformed the number of women council members in the parliament as MPs nationally as well as locally. And it happened, it was a sweeping change across England, because the party, the new Labour Party, was so strong. And that, in a sense, we could call an institutional factor. And so that explained the change in the number of women. Whereas in the US, as you're suggesting, the local educational level, income level of the residents was the main driver of the number of women council members. And so, I mean, with this simple example, you can see that both of these interpretations had validity, and our explicit discussion of them and our consciousness about how and where to analyze the relative impacts was able to be implemented with the shared data, so that we basically ended, he's discussing the disagreement, but we ended with relative agreement.
Yeah.
Okay, so in a sense, that's the happy ending. Shall we let Yasmin perhaps continue?
Sure.
Okay.
Shall
Yasmin Harakan?
I have
Yeah, if you have slides, are fine. That's fine. Yasmin Harakan, if you want to just, your background is Turkish ethnically, living in Germany. She can speak Turkish and German, as well as perfect English, and she's been editing manuscripts and doing very creative things.
Thank you. Yes, so I'm going to just tell you a little bit about two papers that I'm working on. One is more in progress than the other. No, one is more advanced than the other, let's put it that way. And basically my topic is scenes, of course, but also what is the contribution of kind of scenes theory to this idea of using the arts to revitalize low-income or underserved communities. That's the intersection or the topic area that I'm interested in, I'm working on, and the purpose of both papers is to help the research move in that direction, to figure out, understand more, and build more theory. So what you're seeing, oops, I forgot the presentation mode. What you're seeing up there, the title, this is my MA thesis, but I think what I want to do is, just briefly tell you, how was this inspired? There's a case study, there's an artist named Theaster Gates working on the south side of Chicago. He's trained as an artist, he's also trained as an urban planner, and he uses activities and practices from both worlds to create, to work on community revitalization, specifically among Black and low-income communities, or neighborhoods, I should say. And so when you see that kind of an activity, these are real concrete outcomes of his work: housing, galleries, arts and education, resources and learning and opportunities for these residents. And here's another formerly very dilapidated building that he also helped to revitalize. And what his activities, some of the questions they suggest are, can artists drive change in disadvantaged communities? And how might we figure out where else this approach should go? How do you pick and choose opportunity neighborhoods, is what I'm calling them.
I don't know.
And